Who do you say that I am? That's a question Jesus asks about himself. And it's one of the big questions we get to answer, those of us who claim to follow him, or try to follow him at least. Who we say that Jesus is tells us not just about what we believe about him, but it tells us about what we believe about ourselves, about humans, about creation, about the world in which we live and move and have our being, and ultimately about God. It's a big question that our spiritual ancestors have answered in a lot of different ways, some that I like and some that I don't. The 20th century writer C.S. Lewis, who you might know as the author of the Chronicles of Narnia, or perhaps as a dear personal friend of J.R.R. Tolkien, and the inspiration for the Ent Treebeard, yes, I will shoehorn the Lord of the Rings into every sermon I preach. Count on it. I will not change. This is a promise. But C.S. Lewis posed what he called a trilemma, 3 options for responding to the question who Jesus is. In the first place, Jesus, given what he said and did in the Gospels, or rather what he is said to have said and done in the Gospels, Jesus could be a liar. He could not, in fact, be the person he made himself out to be, and that would make him a deceiver at best and possibly even a demonic evil force at worst. He could be a lunatic. He could be somebody suffering from delusions of grandeur. You might even say a Messiah complex. Or he could be Lord, that is to say, exactly who he said he was. The Son of God, begotten, not made, true God from true God, true light from true light, to paraphrase the Nicene Creed. Now you can probably think of a couple objections to Lewis's trilemma. In the first place, aren't there any other options? After all, the biblical scholar and author of many an Intro to the New Testament textbook, Bart Ehrman, posits a 4th L, legend. It's really hard to know what the historical Jesus said and did. These books were written decades after he lived, in Greek, a language he almost certainly did not speak. You should know here how difficult it is to lay your finger upon the historical Jesus, and especially when it comes to stories like the ones we heard today. Frederick Buechner's retelling of the harrowing of hell and the story of Jesus' ascension in the 1st chapter of the book of Acts. I often like to say that the historicity of miracles is a little above my pay grade. But grappling with that question of who Jesus is and how I make sense of these stories, well, I think that's what we're all called to do. And with all due respect to Mr. Lewis, I would like to suggest, for the sake of argument, that Jesus was a lunatic. And that is okay. Certainly, he seems to exemplify many of the traits characteristic of people with mental illness. He is capable of staggering, monumental manic highs and crashing lows. One day he's in religious ecstasy, the life of the party, turning water into wine and dining with sinners and tax collectors, Roman soldiers and sex workers and everybody in between, holding a room with his charisma and his energy and his light. Then the next day, perhaps even later in the same day, he can be weeping his eyes out for a city or a friend. Or he can turn suddenly irritable and difficult, snapping at his friends and loved ones, disappearing into the wilderness for days at a time, moody, unpredictable, inscrutable. Misunderstood by even his closest companions, he tries to express himself through poems and parables, figurative, mythological language that is at times beautiful and pastoral and gripping, and at other times is disturbing, apocalyptic visions. If he lived today, Jesus would most likely be diagnosed with some form of mental illness. And I should know. I live with mental illness, as do 1 in 5 Americans. Bipolar disorder, in fact. And I happen to see in Jesus somebody who, well, I don't know that it's helpful to diagnose him 2,000 years after the fact. After all, what is mental illness changes with time, depending on what the dominant society considers to be sane. And you might well say that Jesus was simply maladjusted to a sick system. But I have to tell you, as somebody who lives with those kinds of highs and lows myself and has had to learn how to live with them, the idea of Jesus as somebody who experienced those same kinds of emotions is really, really important to me. Because if Jesus was, maybe he wasn't a person with mental illness, fine. But if he knew what it was like to be depressed, if he knew what it was like to be manic, if he knew what it was like to be hopeless or joyful, maybe he knew what shame is like too. Because shame is one of the biggest things that you will probably experience if you live with mental illness. Both the ennui, the hopelessness, the flatness that can come with depression, but also the shame that you are enculturated, that I am enculturated, that we are enculturated to feel by the society and the systems that stigmatize us. Because after all, we live in a society where we don't make a lot of space for neurodivergence. We live in a society where we don't make a huge amount of space for different ways of seeing and interacting with the world, for anxious personalities, or for depressive personalities for that matter, or for personalities that bounce back and forth. We expect a kind of gray uniform productivity, and our workplaces are not built for mental health days, are not built for neurodiversity, and neither are our bureaucratic systems. It's almost impossible to find your way through an ADA bureaucratic process to get disability provisions as a person living with a mental illness disability. And it's often the case that people who have particularly severe mental illness can't even get health care because we don't provide health care to every member of our society. Because we have a system that sees people as profit, as dollar signs, whether that's the profit of productivity in the workplace or the profit of paying health insurance premiums. We live in a society where mental illness is seen in many churches as demonic possession, and is seen by many otherwise well-intentioned people as something you're just supposed to get over, as something that can be willed away with yoga or the correct diet or meditation. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do any of those things. Actually, all of those can help a lot with the symptoms of mental illness. But the point of the matter is that we are told from all sides constantly that there is something profoundly wrong with us. We are not supported by too many of our loved ones, our communities, our social structures. And so when that happens over and over again throughout your life, you begin to think maybe that there's something really wrong with you. You begin to suspect that what everybody else tells you about yourself, you begin to suspect that what your mental illness tells you about yourself is true. That you're worthless, that you're broken, that you are unworthy, that you are unlovable, and that someday, perhaps, everybody else will find out exactly how worthless, how unworthy, how unlovable you really are. If you reveal to them the depth of your struggle, if you reveal to them the complexity of your experience, if you reveal to them your mess and your muck, then they will reject you. I wonder if Jesus ever felt that. In fact, I kind of hope that he did. Not because I would wish that kind of debilitating shame on anyone, not because I think that there's anything salvific about that, or romantic about it, let alone. I have paid attention to way too many romanticized stories of the suffering artist who must bleed for their art. Now, I kind of hope that Jesus felt that because I want Jesus to be fully human just like me. Because if I take seriously the idea that Jesus is God incarnate, and I do actually, not to the exclusion of anybody else, but I do take seriously the idea that God is incarnate in our very human lives. And so I want a Jesus who knows what it's like to be fully human. Because even if you don't live with mental illness like I do, you have definitely felt the pits of despair. You have felt grief, you have felt anxiety, you have felt like your own brain, your own mind, your own narrative about yourself, your own ego is playing tricks on you. You know what it's like to forget who you are. We sometimes say that hell is a state of separation from God, and if that's the case, well, let me tell you, I've been to hell. And I suspect that at certain times in your life, you have too. That place where you can't answer the question, who do you say that I am? Because the only thing that seems true anymore is the pain and the alienation and the separation. It's what contemporary philosopher Natalie Wynn calls masochistic epistemology. What hurts is true. And if what hurts is the truest thing about us, then it might sometimes seem that not hurting, not being, is preferable to the alternative. Certainly, Monica Coleman, the author of Bipolar Faith, A Black Woman's Journey with Depression and Faith, felt that way. In her memoir, she writes eloquently about feeling like she couldn't access herself, feeling like she couldn't access God, of being rewarded for being bipolar, because when you're manic, you're on top of the world and people love you for it. People reward you for it. People gratify you for it. But in those wells of depression, in those wells of hopelessness, in those wells of dissociation, feeling like she couldn't find the beloved child of God, that actually that person didn't exist. And her memoir is a beautiful walk through her walk, a journey through her journey, of finding a sense of self and finding a God who believes in that self. Finding a God who is right there with her in that self. As a Black woman, a survivor of sexual assault, who lives with bipolar disorder and post-traumatic slave syndrome. The trauma that carries down through generations. She describes how she was able to develop that sense of self and that sense of God by, well, through a lot of means, actually, by finding people who thought and felt like her, who had been to the same dark places that she had been, by finding communities that told her that God was not separate and God was not distanced, and God did not will the violence she had experienced, and God did not will her despair, but that God was right there in the middle of it, that God was weeping with her, God was depressed with her, and God was manic with her, and God was everywhere in between with her. And I want to share a note from the book. After she's gone through the trials and tribulations of mental illness and sexual violence and simply being a Black woman in America, she talks about rebuilding her life and going out to dinner with people who had played prominent roles at other times in her life, trying to rebuild friendships, trying to recover the sense of identity she had once had. And I want to share with you an excerpt here about how she went about that, because I think it speaks to the kind of God the kind of Jesus I believe in. Sometimes I felt completely lost. Between the soup and the entree, I dashed to the ladies' room, pulled the crumpled note card out of my purse, and told myself to inhale. 2, 3, 4, exhale. 2, 3, 4 again. And I read the card aloud in a whisper. I am a teacher. I am a writer. I am a poet. I am a minister. I am church. I am dance. I am the breath of the ancestors. I am the joy of God. I am my grandmother's prayers. I am my grandfather's dreaming. I am incense burning. I am a woman. I am the natural dread. I am a woman who loves the company of other women. I am a woman who honors the ancestors. I am sister. I am daughter. I am a daughter of Oshun. I am a person who feels deeply. I am alive. I am whole. I am a woman who believes in freedom. I am a woman who fights for freedom. I am a co-journeyer. I am a friend. I am loved by many. Why do you do this? My friend Jessie asked when I told her about this particular dinner outing. Why spend time with someone who can make me feel this way? Because I want us to be friends again. He does too, and I paused. We have to rebuild it. I don't think it will always be difficult. Time will help. We just want to be faithful to the process. Jessie asked again, why do you do this? She pointed to the note card I read from. Oh. Realizing I answered the wrong question. The answer spilled out of me before I had a chance to think about what I was saying. Because I forget. I can't remember who I am. I feel lost. I feel like I'm just this sad person all the time. I feel alone. I can't get to any of this stuff, even when I know it's true. So I wrote it down I paused. To help me remember who I am. To help me remember that I am. I bit my bottom lip and blinked my eyes rapidly. To remember, tears rolled down my cheeks, that I am more than this. That I am more than this. I needed to know that there was more to my life, more to who I was than the pain. I had to be more than depression, more than bipolar. We all need those reminders. Because whether you're mentally ill or not, you have forgotten who you are. I know you have. It's part of being human. We need those people who can remind us. We need those churches who can remind us. We need those therapists and those caseworkers and those communities and those friends and those loved ones who believe us when we tell them what we're feeling and remind us that we are loved. We need to be reminded of who we are. Maybe we even need a note card in our purse. Or, in my case, a tattoo. I got that tattoo a year after I spent a week in a psychiatric hospital in the summer of 2017. I hadn't slept for 6 weeks. I was in the middle of an intense, manic episode. I was being daily abused, both physically and emotionally, by my partner at the time. And I decided, when non-existence seemed preferable to the alternative, that it might be time to get some help. And my friends and my family and my doctors and my community reminded me of who I was. And so, a year later, to celebrate the fact that I was alive and that I was more that in my worst moment, I got this tattoo, the save icon, from my favorite video game. It is a reminder to me that despite everything, it's still you. It's a reminder to me, because you know how a save function works in a game, right? You save the game, and then no matter what happens, you always get to go back and have another chance. You can screw up massively. You can even die. But the save button allows you to go back and take another shot. The save button reminds you that you always have choices, that there's always another chance. To quote the other tattoo I have, which is on my shoulder and a little hard to dig out of this robe, I believe in second chances. That's why I believe in you. Who do you say that you are? Do you say that you are who God knows you to be? Good enough? Whole enough? Beautiful enough? That God would want to become one of us? One of you? Wants to actually share in your life? Does share in your life even when you're feeling like that broken pot needing to be knit back together with lacquered gold, even when you're feeling ostracized from your family of origin because you're gay or you're trans, even when you're feeling broken down by a system that doesn't believe that your life matters. And we don't believe a lot of lives matter in this society of ours. Who do you say that you are? God says that you're so good, you're worth being incarnated as. You're so good, you're worth everything. And that whether you're ascending into heaven or whether you're descending into hell, God's been there too. And God is right there with you. That's a Jesus I believe in. The one who reminds me who I am. And reminds me that it's my job to remind others. So if you live with mental illness, I want you to know today just how beloved you are. And I'm not going to tell you that what you're experiencing does not hurt, does not suck, because it does. I've been there. I know. I'd want to tell you that life is worth living, actually. I want to tell you that there are people who can like you and love you and accept you just the way you are, to paraphrase that great Saint Fred Rogers. I want to invite all of us to be the kind of community that can hold people in heaven, in hell, and everywhere in between. The kind of community that will work for a society and a culture and a world where every child of God gets the resources they need to be well, gets the resources they need to be whole, where every child of God is blessed and loved no matter what. That's my invitation to us this week. That's Jesus' invitation to us every week. Blessed are you who are lost, for you shall find your way home.